Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Banjo-Kazooie. In the last part we finished off Mad Monster Mansion and adventured through Grunty's lair once again, and now we've entered Rusty Bucket Bay, what is far and away my least favorite world in the game. With that said, still got a really catchy musical track, not for nothing. So, the reason this is my least favorite in the world in the game comes down to one specific Jiggy, as well as the area's main mechanic with how that works with the rest of the Jiggies. With that said, because I'm especially playing the N64 release, I'm gonna start with the really rough Jiggy, as that way if I die while doing so, I only have to recollect a very specific pittance of notes to get back to where I was. With that said, you can also do it last for the same reason, but trust me, I recommend doing it first. The first thing we want to do is jump down this ventilation tube. There's several of these across the ship and you can jump down a few of them, but the rest of them are actively enemies, so make sure whenever you approach one you do so slowly. Our goal here is to get to this room and ground pound this switch. This is going to slow down the mechanisms in the room we can see just through the window. Because if you go in there before doing that, I think you could theoretically do the things we need to do in there, but it's so frame perfect that it's just not worth doing. With that said, that switch is actually part of the reason why this Jiggy is so annoying on top of the main room when we get to it. As if I die in the room where the Jiggy actually is, where those mechanisms were, I would have to go back to that switch and repress it to slow down the mechanism again, on top of recollecting any notes I've gotten along the way. That's just tedious. With that said, the main entrance to the room in question is actually on one of the stacks here on the center of the ship. I can never remember which one of the two it is, and that's partially part of the other reason why I don't like this world too much. I feel like it's the samiest feeling world in the game from one area to one area, even with the ship here. I get confused on where certain things are pretty constantly, as one side of the ship looks almost indistinguishable from the other, even down to the boxes. So I'm technically doing this a little out of sequence here. You can ground pound these switches in front of these horns to make them go off. If you press them in the order of 3, 1, 2, 1, 1, 1, a Jiggy spawns in. I haven't seen how you're supposed to know that that's the password yet, but since I was here anyway, I figured I might as well. In order to learn that that's the passcode you need there, I believe you need to go to the, I think it's the left side of the ship from where I am right now, and go along the main deck and look towards the walls where the stacks are. On one of them is a plate that has that number listed on it. Again, I would normally showcase that in the order of actually seeing the event, then going to it, but I was over there anyway because I went the wrong direction, so oh well. Breaking down this door allows us to enter the area where we saw the mechanism slow down. Welcome to the engine room. Before you access the main engine room though, backflip up here to grab one of this level's 2 honeycomb pieces. The engine room is one of the most annoying rooms in the game, and one of the most infamous in the game too. We're gonna have a bunch of gears and mechanisms that are slowly rotating around, and constantly below us is a gigantic bottomless pit, so one mess up can just send you to an early grave and make you need to recollect all your notes here on the N64 release. All of the platforms in here rotate for a moment and then take a brief pause, which is your moment to try and move across them. If you didn't hit the switch in the other room to slow this area down, it would be going a lot faster and just is not worth attempting to actually traverse it, but I think it is possible. Though, fun little thing for me specifically, my personal pet theory for why they actively changed the note collecting to be permanent in the Xbox Live Arcade release on is specifically because of this room and the entirety of the final main world, as the scale increase or difficulty increase was probably just so infamous they went, alright, let's maybe tone it down a little bit. I'm not sure if that's the actual case, but that's been my pet theory for years. I guess future me, see if you can find an actual reason for why they did that. There's a Jiggy in here outright, but while we're in here, there's 2 other switches we can press to slow down the rear rotors of the boat as well. Why those are running while it's at port, I don't know, but I also don't know boats that well. I try to stay on land as much as I can. Don't like being in planes, don't like being on boats. I have extreme motion sickness for things like that. Although, funnily enough, I've never been someone who's really been made motion sick by games largely. Every now and then, like, a weird camera movement partnered with, like, a moving background might give me a little bit of a vertigo moment, but never really motion sickness. But to compare, like, if I'm in a car, not in the driver or passenger seat for longer than, like, 40 minutes, I'm starting to get nauseous. It's real bad. I didn't used to be like that when I was really little, but then as we grow, our bodies change, and things just get worse and worse, and yeah. Although, I personally believe, and this is kind of off topic, I know, my personal pet theory is that it's actually tied to a stomach inflammation I had in late high school, gastritis. where there's even a video on this channel where I talk about having that because I've been doing this for the better part of 14 years at this point, which is just absolutely crazy, by the way. Now, enough about that, though. Getting back to the game, you really want to make sure you're ready before you press the second fan switch in the main part of the engine room to completely stop the rear rotors on the boat. Why? Because them being stopped is timed. We have 65 seconds to actively reach the rear of the boat, go underwater, and grab that Jiggy before the rotors restart. And I want to say if those rotors aren't instant kill when you're even next to them, they do enough damage where you're likely to die to them otherwise. This sucks. What's especially rough about it is because of how samey the boat looks and feels, every time I leave this building, I have to just rely on instinct for which direction the back of the boat is actually in. I can never remember if it's this direction or the other one, but it's actively this way towards this, which I think is meant to be like the engine block. You also need to be careful of the water itself, because the water here is a little special.
My oily water, in you plunge. You'll lose air while in that gunge.
The oily water here in Rusty Bucket Bay has two special properties to it. For one thing, your air meter drains twice as quickly. But for another, it'll even drain just by being in the water, not even fully submerged. If you're at the surface, your air meter will still decrease, so you can drown at surface level. We do need to enter the water several times in this level to make steps towards certain Jiggies, grab some notes, or in some cases even find some Jinjos. But try to stay out of it for as long as you can, because you'd be surprised at how wrong things could go so quickly if you try to do a lot in the water. With that said, the first thing we're going to do in the water, outside of swimming for the Jiggy we just got, is I want to enter the area directly below us in that grate, as the pink Jinjo for this level is under the water in there. There's also blue eggs in the corner that I've never seen anyone go after, because with how tight the oxygen meter can get here, why would you ever remotely want to go after that? As we actively do approach the endgame, though, if there's one thing I will give this game's endgame, specifically its last world into the final boss sequence stuff. Getting a little ahead of ourselves here, yes, I do appreciate this game's endgame for feeling much grander and final compared to some other games I've played. Heck, to directly compare it to another N64 game I've done an LP of. I brought up towards the end of Mario 64 that while I like that game a lot, the latter few levels just feel kind of underwhelming compared to what the game did in the early to mid-game, and that the end game really just sneaks up on you out of nowhere and doesn't really feel final until the credits play. The end game of Banjo-Kazooie feels grander in its scale and in what they're trying to do in such a way where it does feel a lot more final, and I appreciate that. You can feel the end coming more. As much as there's parts of the end that really annoy me. So, at several points around the edge of Rusty Bucket Bay, there's toll holes you can shoot eggs into to cause platforms to appear. What's interesting about this Toll 2 one is that's the only one you can shoot multiple eggs into to make the platform move again in order to get those gold feathers and the Mumbo token. Actually, on that note, worth noting, Rusty Bucket Bay itself doesn't have a Mumbo hut and thus no Mumbo transformation. But the next world, the final of the main worlds, does, and while it is expensive, I'm already most of the way to be able to afford the transformation itself. There's a lot more Mumbo tokens in this game than you actually need, and that actively kind of leads into something I'll talk more about towards the end game, with a plan they originally had for the game they didn't end up executing on, that I'm really glad they didn't, because it would have just been kind of annoying. And in a way, given that it was at least something they had once planned, kind of foreshadows a lot more about how Banjo-Tooie was designed, as well as Donkey Kong 64. The really large collectathon era of Rare kind of got foreshadowed with that. Although, as I brought up in that own LP, Donkey Kong Country 3 as well kind of led itself into that field as well. So, above us a moment ago, I actively ground pounded through a specific window. Most of the windows in this area are yellow glass, but there's one window that's completely see-through. That's the one you can break. You want to make sure you're coming here, as not only is there a Jiggy in here that's just kind of weirdly hidden by the camera, there's also 4 notes there, and hey, well, we're trying to get them all, so might as well grab them. I think the water in here still counts as oily, and the only reason I'm saying I think is because there's one specific building that has a relatively hidden entrance in this world that has normal water in it, and it just feels weird. You might have heard a bit of a weird sound a moment ago that was kind of high-pitched in the game footage. That's part of a Jiggy I'm not getting for a little bit yet, namely there's something beneath the anchor on the ship. But my next goal is instead to get back on top of the roofs to grab some more notes. On top of that, they'll also lead into another Jinjo and the other honeycomb piece for this world, really. Be careful, though, if you either jump into this caged area in the corner or swim through the entrance in the fence, as while that looks like unsuspecting oil water, otherwise, there's a hidden threat within it. If you think back to a prior water level in the game, good old Treasure Trove Cove, you might remember there was a little bit of a friend in the water for us. That shark returns here. It's only in this fenced-in area, but given how close the quarters are, it's likely to catch up to you. Kind of funny thinking about it, though, on that note. Despite having a relatively rocky reputation as a level aesthetic in terms of what the gimmick usually is, especially in platformers, 3D or otherwise, Banjo-Kazooie is effectively 1/3 water level by weight between Clanker's Cavern, Treasure Trove Cove, and Rusty Bucket Bay at a minimum. You could argue maybe putting Freeze Easy Peak in there because ice levels are just frozen water levels, but the mechanics that's so usually different what's there that's not really the same comparison in my eyes. So slightly hidden by the camera in the fenced-in area where the shark and the Jinjo are, there's also an entrance in the wall allowing us to get to the only room in the area that actually has normal water. And here's a switch we can ground pound to spawn in the second honeycomb piece. Now we just need to fly using the flight pattern here to go collect that. With that said, let's take this moment to talk a little bit more about the game's staff. Technically speaking, after the additional artists, the next person listed is the big noise maker, which is the music composer and performer, which is Grant Kirkhope, but we talked about them much earlier in the LP. So technically next up for us is the chief free player, which is the head of Rare's quality assurance team. I want to say at the top of my head he's one of Rare's earliest tenured employees, but his first credit in a video game is actually on the high score list for Marble Madness on the NES. Then similarly, they were on product testing and other critique QA stuff for things like Solar Jetman, Battletoads on NES, Killer Instinct and Donkey Kong Country as a tester and the like. DKC2, same deal. Same with DKC3. The first credits that he has that aren't directly game testing are additional design in Donkey Kong Land 2, game designer in Donkey Kong Land 3, additional design for Blast Core, but post Banjo-Kazooie, they were largely back to being a tester. Conker's Pocket Tales in the Game Boy Color head tester, Jet Force Gemini QA team, DK64 testing team, Rare staff, and Rare Exterminators for Perfect Dark on the Game Boy Color and N64. But they largely became head of Rare QA around the time of this and carried through that role, still being the same thing for Star Fox Adventures, Grabbed by the Ghoulies. They're actively seemingly still at Rare today, with the most recent credits being as a tester on Sea of Thieves, part of the development team for Rare Replay, of course, Kinect Sports Rivals as a tester, test leadership on Kinect Sports Season 2, still largely doing the thing they've been doing since the 80s. Also, the green radioactive water we were in a moment ago, where the one Jinjo was, that's largely the same type of deal as the superheated sand back at Gobi's Valley and the like. It's just a damage plane that you want to stay out of, but it's not too bad if you go in because it's not instant kill. Watch out for these shipping containers on this side of the ship, by the way, because they each have something in them, and you have to enter one of them from above. In fact, I missed one of the somethings inside of them until a little bit later I have to jump cut back to it. That's another thing about this level that kind of always grinds my gears in a minor way. I always miss something because I'm either overthinking it or confusing it with something on the other side, and just think there's either nothing or something there, and it takes way too long for me to remember. I think that's largely a thing with this level's aesthetics, though, where the more mechanical nature and produced nature of like a shipping container and a boat leads to it being symmetrical enough where, while it's organized, in terms of level design that sticks out in your head, it feels very samey compared to some other stages. Despite, in some regards, actually, the next level after this being the samiest level in the game, technically by definition. Watch out for these box enemies, by the way, because they actively explode if they try to charge into you, and that can do a lot of damage quickly. With that said, if you kill them first, they don't explode off the top of my head. The next group of developers listed in the game's credits are the Rare Free Players, aka the Rare Testing Team. Specifically, there's Stephen Brand, Gareth Glover, Gavin Hood, Steve Malpass, Adam Munton, Sean Reed, Jamie Williams, Andrew Wilson, and David Wong. Stephen Brand started as a QA tester on Diddy Kong Racing, then worked on this. They were an assistant director for Star Fox Adventures, then they were a producer for Viva Pinata on the 360 and PC. They were largely then involved in the publishing or production field to begin with, being a publisher for things like Kinect Sports, Star Wars The Old Republic Rise of the Hutt Cartel. They were a voice actor of all things. And then they were either an additional voice actor or game designer. For instance, they were the voice of Henry Baker in Call of Duty Vanguard. Grid Legends on PC, they were the game designer. But their most recent credits are FC25 as an associate creative director, same with WRC on Windows in 2023. And they also played Sandrick in Immortals of Avium, a game that looked really interesting to me for all of 5 seconds before I saw what the gameplay actually looked like. This is the shipping container where I actually missed something, and I don't even know if I can actively hear the effect in question. But hidden in the boxes towards the back center of the area is one of the 5 Jinjos in this world. So I need to come back to this box later to grab that, but I don't think I do that until next time off the top of my head. So my next goal here in Rusty Bucket Bay is to head to where the anchor is that I mentioned earlier. And I do technically skip a step here, but I'll talk about that when we get over there more specifically, as it'll come in order to play there. For the moment, the next person in the test player team over at Rareware is Gareth Glover, who started as a lead tester for Frankenstein Through the Eyes of a Monster on the Sega Saturn. Then they were on things like Max, Mechanized Assault and Exploration, on DOS as a tester, testing staff for the first MDK, and then they were on this. And then they were part of the Fearsome Foursome for Perfect Dark, 007 Nightfire, they were a game designer. They were largely then on games like the F1 series and ESPN Sports Connection through the next good little bit. But more recently, they're actively at Ubisoft. Assassin's Creed Origins, they were a lead game designer. Odyssey, they were a game design director. Valhalla, they were the associate game director, and they were in the special thanks for Mirage. So, back here over where the anchor is, if you look at the anchor directly when it's on the floor, there's a dolphin trapped underneath it. And I actively did technically skip a step here by not talking to the dolphin first, but you can swim up where the anchor is and go through that hallway to press that switch to raise the anchor and free the dolphin.
Thanks, guys. I found this earlier. It's yours.
And thus, that is another Jiggy. How that dolphin is okay being in oil-infested water for that long and even leaves Rusty Bucket Bay from here because the harbor's closed, I don't know, but I'm just going to assume they get out okay. Hopefully, if memory serves, that dolphin, who I think their name is Snorkel. I don't think they're in Banjo-Tooie at all from my memory, so I'm just going to assume they made it out and are partying. The next main tester credited in the game is Gavin Hood. They started working as a game tester on Donkey Kong Country 2 and then did the same for the Game Boy version of Killer Instinct. Donkey Kong Land 2 and DKC 3, same deal. Killer Instinct 2 in gold, additional designer. Tester for GoldenEye 007. Tester for Donkey Kong Land 3. Additional design for Blast Corps. After Banjo-Kazooie, though, they were notably on the main team for Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge. Worms 4 Mayhem, they were a game designer. They were a designer on the entire Alien Breed Evolution trilogy on PS3, 360, and PC in 2009 and 10. Worms, Clan Wars, and Ultimate Mayhem, they were a lead designer, and they're still working on Worms today, even being credited as a main designer for Worms WMD, Killer Frequency. The Survivalists, they were lead designer, and Blasphemous for PC, they were design support specifically, that Metroidvania Souls-like inspired game. After them is Steve Malpus, who started as a QA tester on Diddy Kong Racing, then they were on this. Banjo-Tooie, Perfect Dark, they were a voice actor and part of the main staff. They were a voice actor for Melee, of all things. Star Fox Adventures, they were another voice actor. In fact, I believe they were Fox in that game. They were on the game design team for Grab by the Ghoulies. They were a voice actor in Perfect Dark Zero and Cameo. Rabbids, Rumble, and the 3DS, they were on the design team, but largely they've been a character voice since in Smash, Wii U, 3DS, and Ultimate. Their most recent credit was as a designer on that very recent disaster, Mind's Eye. You can break that window there, by the way. There's a couple windows you can break like that. And they look pretty one-to-one on certain older TVs, but if you actively pan the camera to the side, you can tell what windows on the ship you can break or not, based on whether or not they're actually like a 3D object or not. Hello, Conker Squirrel. That was probably meant to tie into the original version of Conker's High Tails or whatever that eventually became Conker's Bad Fur Day. Also, just to the left of me right now, you saw it on screen for a second, there was a life preserver on the wall that wasn't an enemy with a sign behind it. That's the sign that tells you the combination you need for the 3 buttons with the whistles tied to them. And this room's full of pipes, but there's largely notes in here and a Mumbo token. I almost already have enough Mumbo tokens, I believe, for the next transformation, so I can largely start ignoring them moving forward. And I do just that once I know I have enough. Similarly to the 4 notes in the wine cellar back in Man Monster Mansion, there are some notes in this world where they're largely more obscured by the camera, especially in rooms like this, than they are being behind something or by the draw distance. If only because you can't move the camera in rooms like that too well. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 13, we're going to go finish off Rusty Bucket Bay before making our way towards the final main world in the game. See you guys then.